What's up, Tweener Heads? Welcome back to another Tweener Head tennis segment here with Phil. And today we have a very special guest with us. We have Mike Cation. Mike Cation, you might know if you are on tennis Twitter, and if you're not, he's Mike C. Tennis. He's also known as the USTA Pro Circuit announcer. He hosts a Coffee Cast podcast with pro tennis player Noah Rubin, a former announcer of Illinois basketball for the PA, and he's also a Twitch streamer, if you all didn't know that. That's a fun fact from Mike. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to do it. Thank you for the opportunity.
No problem. I just wanted to get your story out there because you've been making an impact yourself as an announcer on the USTA Pro Circuits, and everyone seems to know you in the tennis world for your insight. And I think that's a story that everyone needs to know about.
Well, I appreciate that. I never thought that would be the case. To be perfectly honest, considering I don't have the high level knowledge that former players necessarily do. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun getting to learn the game from a different side. And I think that's why a lot of the players have treated me with a lot of respect and kindness, is because of the fact that I do like to learn and try to get their insight as much as possible. But it's been an incredibly fun journey for me.
Absolutely, and everyone's getting to know you a little bit more down the road as well. And I think to start off, you were the Illinois basketball PA announcer, and then you fell into this transition where you had to make a decision between sticking to that or doing the announcements for the pro circuit for the USTA. What made you switch to tennis initially? Because it's kind of different going from college basketball to maybe a smaller crowd in some people's eyes on an ATP Challenger in Tiburon or Nashville, somewhere within those lines.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the PA announcing was actually that was all part time. Yeah. So basically, I mean, to be blunt, I made $100 a game.
Wow.
And yeah, that's not a lot of money. So I was actually for about 13 years, I was doing Top 40 radio. I was the news and sports guy for Top 40 radio station in Champaign, Illinois. I also just before I took this job announcing for the pro circuit, I had actually switched careers and went and worked at a nonprofit. Where I was doing some fundraising work, special events and fundraising work for a nonprofit in Champaign. But I'd actually been even before I was doing public address announcing for basketball. The first PA announcing I ever did was back in 2001. So this is, I mean, essentially the story of how everything really came about for me. When I was playing high school, I didn't start playing tennis till I was a freshman in high school. And I got pretty good pretty quick coming off of a baseball background. And I started taking lessons at the Atkins Tennis Center on the University of Illinois campus. And my coach for a few sessions was Craig Tiley, who is now the Tennis Australia CEO and Australian Open Tournament Director. He was just starting as the head coach for the University of Illinois men's team. So then when a few years later, after I graduated college and I was doing a radio interview with him, and I had not seen him in about 5 years, and he remembered me. And so this was 2001, 2000. And he said, listen, I'm looking for somebody to do the public address announcing at our tennis matches. Would you be interested? And I'd been on the job for maybe 4 months at my radio station, and I said, sure. And he actually, even at the time, couldn't pay me. So he would take me on some road trips with the team back in 2002, 2003. They won the national championship in 2003. I was doing some media stuff for them. But that's how I actually started the public address announcing. And then from there, I started doing, I was the PR person for the Illinois Champaign-Urbana Challenger for 7 or 8 years. So I made connections within pro circuit, within officials, players, and I did that for almost 10 years. And so then at the NCAA tournament in Champaign, 2013, one of the Challenger supervisors was there, had come down from Chicago, was attending some meetings, and he said, listen, I know you just got out of broadcasting and are doing something new, but they're looking for an announcer for the USTA Pro Circuit. Have you ever done that? Would you be interested? And I hadn't actually ever done tennis play-by-play, but it was something that I'd wanted to do since I was, a teenager. And I said, sure, I have to take this opportunity. So about a month later, I was doing a match in Winnetka, Illinois, with, no broadcasting experience doing tennis, with no knowledge of like the real tactical stuff of what happened within a tennis match. So again, to think about the fact that now I'm doing Grand Slams in 6 years later it's a pretty crazy ride.
That's a big learning curve that you had to throw
It
yourself
really
into.
You don't, it's I still think of myself as a tennis fan, and to really understand the game at a different level when players are sitting and talking to you about how they looked to break down a match is a completely different thing that I don't think a lot of fans talk about, just in terms of the routine of setting up. Your serve placement is more so to set up your second shot, not necessarily to just get to the free point. The missed return, like little intricacies that I don't think I had even a thought about, and I still am learning so much. But yeah, it's a different thing once you get into the weeds of broadcasting. And on top of it, and I'm sorry, I'm just talking and blabbing here, but when I think about my audience for who's watching challengers, Philip, you're a perfect example. You are somebody who is taking time out of your day to find challenger tennis, on a broadcast medium. That's a higher level tennis fan. So I had to learn really quickly in the first couple of years how to at the very least match my knowledge with somebody like yourself. And then hopefully try to get just a little bit better where I felt more comfortable talking with players about some more, deeper tennis tidbits.
So would you say when you look at your audience, would you say you're tailoring towards fans such as myself who has more extensive background within the tennis world? Or would you say
100%?
Or would you kind of mix it into trying to teach people that are not familiar with the sport as well? Or do you kind of stick to that one audience?
Yeah, this year has been pretty interesting in that, to answer your question, when I'm doing challengers, I am making the assumption that these are fans who are knowledgeable about the players in some level, and know who Bjorn Fratangelo is, know who Noah Rubin is, have an understanding of who Yannick Sinner is, when he was with us over the summer. That being so yes, I absolutely know I can kind of talk at a different level. Now, this year when Tennis Channel started doing some challengers, which is amazing that it's taking challenger tennis to a different audience. I've tried to, for the lack of a better term, I've tried to dumb down the how I'm talking, just because I have to understand that people who are watching Tennis Channel they have that ability to kind of click through, and they might just pop on to the Tennis Channel and say, oh, let's see what live match is on. I don't know who Bjorn Fratangelo is, so in that moment, it's up to me to educate the audience a little bit more about who those players are. Same thing when I'm doing a Grand Slam. If it's Roger Federer against Sumit Nagal, which was a match that I did this year, everybody knows who Federer is. I was in this unique opportunity where I know who Sumit Nagal is. So in that opportunity, how cool was it that I get to tell some of this young man's story? So the most important rule, or one of the most important rules in broadcasting, is know your audience, which is the short answer to your question. Yeah, you absolutely have to know who you're talking to at any given time. And I absolutely know that if it's just on the stream for a challenger, that's a much more educated tennis fan.
And I think that's the toughest part when you're trying to get a new audience, especially within the tennis world. And tennis has been kind of pushing towards it, but not yet grasped the young viewer's attention, which is the future of our sport.
Yeah,
I think it's very traditional, at least in my view, just the way it's run within those things. And to kind of go along with your answer and to build on it, you've found a different way to talk to different audiences on different levels of tennis knowledge. You haven't just done Grand Slams, you also done ESPN broadcast for colleges that you just did recently for the ITA
Yeah.
championships. So when you have someone on ESPN Plus or just checking it out, and when you're trying to tell people, hey, there's more to pro tennis than people think, there's also college tennis that people need to take a look at. Is there a different approach that you have?
Yeah, that's a great question, Philip. Boy, I don't even know how to answer that. I think it's one of the things that when you mentioned the podcast that I do with Noah, it is when I'm talking to my parents, neither of whom have any interest in tennis, never played tennis, don't watch tennis except when I'm broadcasting something. It is next to impossible to explain to them, A, who I'm working for on a given week. When I try to explain what's the difference between a challenger and a grand slam, and what is the ITA, what's an ITF, what's an ATP, what's a it is. I understand why there are so many different organizations. It would just be so much better and easier if we just had one. I don't know that that's ever going to happen, because there are so many financial interests that are important, wanting to have control in those situations. But if we had one singular governing body for the sport of tennis, we would be able to streamline a lot, and it would be greatly helpful. I loved my opportunity with the ITA 2 weeks ago here in Tulsa. I had to get into this explanation though with my mom, and she said, "Well, what's the ITA? I thought these were college players," and having to explain that there's an intercollegiate tennis association and the NCAA, and that was part of the what we were trying to do in the broadcast of why the ITA is important, because the NCAA doesn't have individual events in the fall, and it's. Again, I understand why all these organizations are involved, but I think in order to make it more easy for people to follow, yeah, it would be much better if we just had a singular organization that was the governing body for the sport of tennis.
I've never thought of it that way, because there has been talk on Twitter recently to imagine if the ATP had a commissioner, just one ruling body over everything. And I've even tried to figure out why Grand Slams and ITFs and ATP and WTA are all different entities within the sport of tennis. Yeah. And not many people understand that when it comes to a casual tennis fan. Right. And I've had this conversation with someone I work with now at a tennis shop. When you have certain people that blow up the sport of tennis like Coco Gauff, they get more media coverage. And if you actually think about it, there are better players than Coco Gauff at this age, but no one really knows about them. Like Amanda Anisimova, she actually had a better run at a Grand Slam than Coco Gauff did, but will the casual tennis fan know who Anisimova is versus Coco Gauff? Who do you think they're going to know? Coco Gauff. Of course. And to explain that, it just seems like a whirlwind of acronyms that you throw at someone, and someone's going to lose interest within the first 10 seconds.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
So, kind of to go back into your career, as our train of thought just lasted forever.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's nothing more to say about it, though. I mean, it's exactly right, Philip. I mean, it's going to be, it's frustrating, because I think that it's a great sport and we have so many opportunities to grow it. But to a casual fan, they're going to get lost in the weeds so quickly, and that's too bad, because I think you're missing out on a lot by not embracing simplicity.
And that's why I'm trying to, and we are trying to promote the sport as much as we can with our stories and what we try to create. Absolutely
right, because I think here's the thing. I know that when when I've hit mainstream in moments, whether it be Marcus Willis with the Snickers and the RC Cola, obviously the sex incident in Sarasota,
That was a wild
some
one.
of those moments. Yeah, it was crazy. But that's the thing, is that
That's what drives people to tennis.
it's what drives people to the lower levels of tennis, right? And so then they're just like, oh, that's cool. That I didn't realize somebody is broadcasting it at these events, and then like, okay, cool, I'll go check that out. How do I do that? So I mean, that's the thing. We've just got to find those little moments. But again, if we're spending so much time explaining instead of just like, here's the sport,
We're doing something wrong.
I don't know if we're doing necessarily what we need to be doing.
Yeah, I agree. So to get back to
But
who
enough
Mike
about
Cation
that.
is,
Let's talk about me, okay? I want to talk about me. That's why I'm
let's
here.
talk about Mike.
Yes.
When it comes to broadcasting and having a voice within the sport, which I think you probably have one of the best announcing voices on the tour because everyone
nice of
knows
you.
who you are.
I'll send you money later. Sure.
Did you have a mentor or someone that inspired you to kind of go through this career choice, or is there someone you
No.
looked up to when you started doing this?
No. I had this. So yeah, I watched tennis when I was young. McEnroe was my guy, which is fascinating because I critique him so much now. But I didn't know anybody else who played tennis. So I would watch by myself, and obviously, Dick Enberg was a legend, right? In the late '80s, mid '80s, late '80s, he was tennis god. When you're watching Breakfast at Wimbledon and things like that. And so I just had this idea that that's what I wanted to do. But then all of a sudden, when I life happened and I'm not doing it, and I even for a little while, from about 2010 to 2013, I wasn't watching tennis anymore. So I kind of was out of the game in a way. So I didn't have a mentor when I started doing this in 2013, which I think in a way is actually kind of good, in that then I just kind of, like, my style is, I think, different than a lot of other tennis broadcasters. I think I'm much more loose. I think in some ways I'd actually say unprofessional than some other broadcasters, which has been a bit of a stumbling block, a roadblock for me in terms of getting some other opportunities. But I think I've gotten better in that regard. But now I get to have these opportunities, like when I was working for ATP Media in Cincinnati and getting to sit in and watch Robbie Koenig, and I get to work with him on the world feed at the Australian Open every year. And a guy, I think Nick Lester is maybe the best play-by-play guy in the world in terms of tennis. And I got to work with him a year ago at the Australian Open, and just hearing him as I'm doing some analysis about some of the challenger, guys, now I have mentors. Like I didn't when I started, but now I have guys who I'm sitting there and thinking, okay, how can I incorporate their style and what they do well into what I do well and make myself better? But I mean, Robbie is as good as it gets. Nick Lester, I got the opportunity to work with Kevin Skinner for the first time this year, who I think is hilarious, and his ability just to drop these random references in so well. So I have mentors now that I didn't when I started.
Do you think that it's crazy to think about that, because usually when people get thrown into a job, they do their own research. They do their own background checks. They kind of see who they can model something after. And it's hard to do that in tennis when you don't really have the same person doing every broadcast. Like Sunday Night Football has this Troy Aikman and Joe Buck usually on Fox on Sundays. And you can hear them and you can kind of see how they use their knowledge to the best way of describing a football game. But in tennis, you have Tennis TV, you have Tennis Channel, you have you have a plethora of so many other people that don't necessarily do the same job.
Right.
So for you, at least, it makes more sense to learn as you go after you have established your own voice.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And like I have when I started, so again when Netka 2013, I still have a couple of my prep sheets from back then that were, I mean, basic level prep sheets of like, okay, person is ranked this, and they're from here, and I mean it's mind boggling to look at now, but yeah, it's I do somewhere, I don't like a Google Doc somewhere. Um, yeah. Yeah, what's interesting is so my prep sheets are actually I've in the last couple of years I've actually dumbed them down for myself the last 2 years. Yeah, to this was some advice I'd gotten just to essentially you don't want to have too much in front of you. Because then you're focusing on that instead of what's actually happening in front of you. So I've taken some of the stuff out that I had in, but my notes at this point are very much. It's let's see, name obviously the basics, name, ranking, etc. Live ranking, last six results, what they've done this week, last time they were in a quarterfinal, semifinal, final, how many titles, so that I can just reference things if I need them. And it's pretty simplistic in that regard. But when I started, I had no idea what I would actually need for a broadcast because I didn't talk to Robbie Koenig or Chris Fowler or somebody like that. I just went and did it. So as a result, I kind of learned what I needed as opposed to what is the standard. And then it's just kind of grown. And again, you listen to more and more people who have all these completely different and unique styles. And so you just kind of pick, something from Robbie that you might like, and you might pick something from Chris Fowler that you might like, and just kind of incorporate it into your own broadcasting style, your notes, go from there.
So what would you say is something that you put on your note sheet that other people wouldn't expect?
Other people wouldn't expect. That's a great question. Wow. Philip, you have stumped me, and that is rare. I don't know that there is anything that people wouldn't expect.
Like something like you wouldn't put something random or like a fun fact for them that like just to like get people's attention about them.
Yeah, there are times when it's more specific to players that I might know something specific. Yeah, I absolutely do that. Like random things, so like knowing their favorite football team, or that yesterday they went on a boat cruise or something like that. But it's more specific to the player as opposed to like I have a special line item where I say, make sure to include this or something. It's more specific for each individual player, and a lot of it is just stuff that I try to spend as much time as I can with players so that I get a good understanding of where they're at mentally, what they're doing off court, so that I can incorporate that. But it's more built off of those conversations and then my ability to retell that as opposed to putting something into my notes.
Okay, that makes more sense. I think because when it comes to that, it's very different when you have I have like a stat sheet, you have something prepared, and then you might like throw something in there. So I just never really know when it comes into that.
Yeah, it's much more that, especially if it's a bad match, it's a blowout, and then I can just kind of drop a conversation that I've had with players, and that's something that I can do at the challenger level that I can't at a slam. My lounge, if you will, is the same as any other player. We're getting bananas and water from the same location at the challenger level. So I think that's been actually probably the most enjoyable part of my job, is the fact that I get to interact with these athletes who are at this incredible level, and I get to interact with them at a very personal level, and I'm so honored to be able to do that.
And on a similar boat with you because I've interacted with players off the court as well as on, and I've been a hitting partner for a couple challengers. And when you get to know these players in a certain setting, and when you have to separate it between being a journalist, quote unquote, I use that word very freely with my work because I don't necessarily want to be known as, oh, I write for or I blog for. I am my own entity in the same regard as you are, because we both have a brand that we want to create and that we maintain. So to have let's say a friendship or a rapport with a player and then go do your job, you can't intermingle both.
Correct.
Which is very hard for me because it's hard to have a friendship with someone off the court while doing your job. And I think that's one of the hardest things that you have to do. And now that you have a podcast with Noah Rubin, I think that's even harder.
I completely agree. Doing some of Noah's matches of late have been difficult. We've talked about it, but the thing is, I know a lot of tennis Twitter doesn't like Tennis Sandgren, and I understand why. Don't get me wrong. I completely understand why.
Yeah.
But he has been, for me, when it comes to the broadcasting aspect, in what you're talking about specifically, he's been the voice of reason for me. He said to me one time, we all know you're doing your job. We also know that when you're doing your job, that's your job. And when you're not doing your job, you're just Mike, you're just a guy. And not every player reacts that way. But I think most of the players at this point know that I'm going to be able to have those conversations when you're out at dinner or grabbing breakfast, or when we were in Little Rock, Arkansas, for the Challenger there. It was when Noah and I were talking a lot about doing the podcast. I sat in. It was him and Martin Redlicki and Alex Lawson, and random guys just kept popping in. They were just all playing FIFA for hours, and I would just kind of sit in, do my prep work because it was a couple of straight days of rain. And I would always say, everything that's said in here is in the cone of off the record. I mean, and I think the players know, because I haven't, knock on wood, right? I haven't broken that barrier of what's ever off the record. I know it's off the record.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something to be said for that. And I think it's really hard, because I've said this before. I know when guys have just been dumped by their girlfriend. I know when somebody is having their mom is having a health crisis. I know all these things, but I know that I don't want to say it, because I think my job is really to tell the stories about them as a tennis player. And if they want to have me incorporate something into the broadcast, I'm happy to do that. But at this point, I would say most of these players know. I know what's on the record. I know what's off the record. And we all try to keep it professional so that we tell a good story.
I completely agree, and I wish there was a way that the ATP or the WTA will allow us to, or trust us in that sense, where there is a common ground for people doing their job and people having this kind of relationship with the players.
Yeah, I think it's much harder at that level, just because, listen, you and I, say, might have a very positive way of expressing stories on Twitter or wherever we publish or record or what have you. But there are so many people who will take one little tidbit, that somebody might drop in a off the record conversation and put it on there.
I can already think of many people doing that.
Yes, you and me both. So I completely understand why ATP and WTA. Getting my first opportunity as a ATP media this year and understanding the PR side and why they do what they do. I completely respect it. I wish it was better, but I completely understand it, because their most important job is to protect the players from those people who will do harm. And so yeah, I completely agree with it. And yeah, it's frustrating for people who want to do better. But that's how it's going to be, and I understand why.
Moving on from that very serious topic, what is the story behind the old folks chair on your Instagram, where you basically commented an entire tournament from something I would find in my grandmother's house?
Yeah. So this is something I started. So a year ago, so last 2018, Winnetka, which is in July. Let's see. I guess I should preface this by saying, you've been to enough challengers. You know that most of the time you're either sitting in bleachers or those plastic folding chairs. The reality of my job is that I sit for 12 hours a day, broadcasting tennis, and so I'm sitting on those plastic chairs, and I have some back issues that actually started during a challenger in Maui, when a tent collapsed on me with a 2x4 slamming me in the back, but that's a different story. But then last year, I was in Winnetka, and because it was so close to what was home then in Champaign, I had my own car. And on my way into the courts, it was like garbage day.
You took it from the garbage.
Winnetka's, so it's where the Home Alone house is. It's like richer than rich, right? And so I'm their garbage was this really nice chair, and I'm like driving it, and I'm just like, that's a nice chair. And then I like get 3 blocks up, and I'm just like, I should take that chair. And so I do a Yui in the middle of the street and like drive back, and I'm just like, screw this. And I just pick it up and put it in, and I took it, and I showed up. It's 9:30. I have to go on the air at 10 o'clock, and everybody, like, there are players warming up, and I'm just like walking across the court with this big old chair, and I just sat there, and for the rest of the week I had no back problems. And I was just like, I don't know if I said, holy shit, like, this has just changed my life. I gave it to Salvation Army when I left, because I wasn't going to take it home with me.
You couldn't take it.
So I just got to this point where now every tournament where I have a card that's big enough, I go to Salvation Army or Goodwill, and I buy a $5 or $10 chair for the week. And then I just put it into my spot for the week, and then I take it back to Goodwill or Salvation Army at the end of the week. And
I love that.
That's it.
I absolutely love that.
It's an investment in myself. It's $10 that I'm investing in myself so that my back doesn't hurt nearly as much, and I haven't had the same back problems over the last year and a half that I used to week in, week out.
Oh my God, that's hysterical. I've never.
Yeah, so most of them are terrible. I mean, most of them are. I mean, if you're spending $5 on a chair at Salvation Army, there's a reason you're.
It's quality. It's better than a fold chair that you would get from a rental company.
Correct. No, that's absolutely right. And you're gonna feel much more comfortable, and you're not gonna be shifting the entire time, so you can feel like you can kind of get into the match and get a good feel of it.
Mike, I'm not even gonna lie. When I go to Houston for the Challenger, I swear to God, I might do that myself.
You should. It's if you've got a car and you have the opportunity to like put something in the back of your car, do it. Because if you have to sit, you got to sit in comfort. So yeah, that's been my biggest thing over the last year and a half in terms of just improving the quality of my life.
Oh my God, I love that. I absolutely love that, and for a second while you were telling me that story, I'm like, Mike is a dumpster diver, and that's why Mike Cation steals chairs.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well. If you're gonna do it, you got to do it.
Yeah, it's true. I'll probably do that for my first apartment. Not gonna lie. It's fine. So let's get down to the Coffee Cast podcast that you do with Noah Rubin. We've touched upon it a little bit, and I kind of see you guys as the new tennis insiders, if if I was to put it into my own words, because you're the commentator, Noah's the pro, you both have your own insights, and then you kind of come into this collective unit where you put you show the reality of what it's actually like. How did you kind of decide you wanted to do this with Noah?
Thanks for letting me talk about the podcast. It's something that I think both Noah and I are really, really proud of. So I'd actually been doing a podcast for a couple of years already, which is, it was the Coffee Cast. And the idea was something that I talked about with Tim Smichek of all people. And we just kind of, because we both have a love for coffee, and we just had this idea of just like, he said, well, you should do it in coffee shops. And it was kind of inspired the idea of, Seinfeld's comedians in cars getting coffee. Just this idea that if you're doing a more informal interview where you're not by a tennis court, and so you don't have other players who are coming by, and you're not just talking about tennis, like how did you improve your forehand? You're going to get more out of a player. And so Tim was among the first. Bjorn Fortangelo was among the first. And it just kind of it wasn't something I was doing on a set schedule. It was just when I had time, which is not often. But Noah was a guest on it one time last April, so April 2018. And he liked the format. We started talking a lot after that. In fact, about Seinfeld, comedians in cars getting coffee. We talked a lot about that. And then he was obviously doing all this Behind the Racquet stuff. He actually told me about Behind the Racquet before it launched because he wanted to get my thoughts on it. And then when Little Rock happened, and it was just a random tournament where we had 2 straight rain delay days, to complete washouts. And we were actually staying across the hall from each other at the hotel. And we're friendly enough. We would get coffee and dinner and whatever already, but we just started talking about Behind the Rack and what he wanted to do with it. And he said, I kind of want to do a podcast. I don't know where to start. And, are you interested? And we can kind of combine what you're doing with what I'm doing, because it's similar vein. His idea of Behind the Racket in terms of just making sure people know the stories of these players off the court, behind the racket, obviously. It is very much, if you go back and listen to some of those interviews I did, it's the same basic principle. Just the idea of, okay, we know who you are on the court. We know what your favorite shots are. We know what you suck at. What are you like off the court? What are the things that are important to you? And so it's just a matter of just joining forces. I have obviously the technical knowledge of radio from doing 13 years of radio. He's obviously got the knowledge of what it's like to be a player, especially at the challenger level. And what he's doing behind the racket, it really, we just have very similar ideas of just wanting to make sure that people know a little bit more about the sport and about the people who are competing in the sport.
And would you say, what's the goal you guys want to bring out of it? Because you both kind of have your own voice, and Noah has his Behind the Racket.
Yeah.
What do you want? What would you see the future of the podcast being?
I don't know that. I don't know that we necessarily have a goal. To be honest, I think we just both have the idea that we want to see the sport grow. And honestly, I don't know that we necessarily have this idea of our podcast is going to be the voice of the next generation or something, as big or ideal as that. It's just the idea of we have an opportunity. We both have a voice in our own small way. And we want to talk about how we think we can make the sport better and discuss some ideas. And on top of it, we're trying to really incorporate a lot of different players as well. Noah's actually, Charlottesville's coming up in a couple of weeks, and he's coming down for a couple of days, even though he's injured and not playing, so that we can record some podcasts just with players, because I think that's the hope, is that We had Christopher Eubanks talking about Oracle the week that Oracle announced that they were doing all these new tournaments, and whether that's good for the sport, whether it's, whether the money could be moved in a different direction. It was a great discussion, I thought. Martin Redlicki, an NCAA champion, what it's like coming out of college. And so I think the more and more we hear these different voices and incorporate kind of that behind the racket type of mentality into the podcast, I think that's where we want to go. But honestly, the goal really is just, how can we grow the sport? How can we give these players voices? And how can we make it fun for everyone, so that everybody knows who Noah Rubin is, who Martin Redlicki is, Christopher Eubanks, those kind of people. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just really an outlet for us, and we're trying to make the best of it.
That definitely answers my question, and I really do enjoy your podcast. It was one of the first tennis ones I actually started listening to, so I really appreciate what you guys do. And I think to wrap up this discussion about you, I think we have to point out you being a Twitch streamer for poker.
Yeah, right.
1, why poker? 2, how did you get into Twitch?
I've been playing poker for a long time. I was part of the Chris Moneymaker boom a few years ago. I got into Twitch because, yes, I watch Fortnite streams, even though I don't play.
Mike. Yes! Mike is the new generation. Yes!
Yeah, I'm a big Nick Merckx fan, okay? What can I say?
Are you really?
Yeah, I really do watch. I actually have it on in the background right now.
Do you really?
I'm recording this.
I watch Tim the Tatman all the time.
Yeah, I'm a big Nick Merckx and Cypher fan. So, but yeah, so I know some people who play a lot of poker online as well, and who are doing some streaming. And they said I should probably try to do it. So I did it for a while. Then I had to kind of stop for a little bit with my move and everything that was happening surrounding that. So I'm actually going to start streaming my poker again in December. But yeah, so that'll be back up in December.
And that's actually awesome. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's just,
so random too. Like,
yes.
When I was on your site, I was doing my research. All of a sudden, it's just, oh, you can watch my live streams on twitch.tv/Mike C. And I was like, oh, what is this? And then you're hosting someone, I think yesterday, and I was thinking to myself, wait, why? Like, why is this happening?
No, let me just say, I think there are a ton of similarities between poker and tennis.
Really?
Yes. The idea of the heads up battle, me versus you, there are so many, you have to make a split second decision based on the knowledge that you have about yourself, the knowledge you have about your opponent. You have to play percentages as best you can, and that informs your knowledge. Very similar to, as a player is running out to a forehand, you have to make this split-second decision, knowing what your strengths are, what you do well on your forehand as you're moving out to your right. Then you have to think about directionally, where do I go against my opponent? What do they do well? What do they not? So you've got all of these little mini informational pieces that are going into this split-second decision that you have to make in half of a second after a ball is hit. It's very similar to, okay, the turn card has just come on, and I know what the flop is. I know what my hand strength is. Okay, I've got all this information on the guy who I'm playing right now in poker. What he likes to do in this situation after an ace just hit the turn. Okay, percentage-wise, he probably has an ace 60% of the time here. Do I play it like that, or do I play it a different way? So all of these different factors that come into a split-second decision, and you're trying to constantly outthink your opponent, go to a different level. I think poker and tennis are incredibly similar, and I think poker was natural for me when I started because of the fact that I had all this tennis background, playing, and this was my competitive outlet after I stopped being able to play tennis at a competitive level.
That's crazy, and I've never really thought of it that way. I could see it as when you face someone head to head, and it's more the mental side of trying to keep everything up and trying to stay in the moment and thinking ahead 2 steps while still playing the ball as you're going, because that's how I see it. Because every time I play poker, I lose my money within 5 seconds. Tennis, I at least can get 3 more balls before I lose it.
Well, we should play poker pretty often.
I would like to. Next time we're at the same tournament, I would love to play poker with you.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun, and I do get pretty competitive during my streams. I swear a lot. I play a lot of music, and it's pretty chill. So, you know, I actually just switched my Twitch name over to Mike C Tennis as well. So it's nice and easy for people to find it if they want to. But yeah, again, I'm going to start streaming. It's on my list of projects to do tomorrow is get my stream set up just the way I wanted it. So I'm really excited to start doing that again.
Awesome. So that will be the first plug while we end this episode of Tweener Head Tennis with Mike Cation. You can follow him at twitter.com/MikeCTennis. Instagram, it's Mike C Tennis as well, correct?
That is correct.
What else? Do you want any other plugs?
No, I listen. I'm really happy to have been able to get on the podcast, tell a couple of terrible stories.
This should be interesting.
I don't often get to do that, so I really appreciate the opportunity very much. And if you guys do have some ideas about kind of what we were talking about, I'm always willing to listen on Twitter, direct message me on Instagram, email on my website, whatever is easiest for you guys. I'm happy to do it.
Same here, and I really appreciate Mike taking time out of his day to talk to us. And we didn't get a surprise from your cat, actually.
Yeah, no, she's sitting on my lap still and staring at me because normally this means it's dinner time when I talk this much to her. So she is pissed right now. So I'm going to go give her some gushy foods.
Good luck with that, Mike. And thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of Tweener Head Tennis. If you guys want to follow us, make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, as well as following us on all our social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all with Tweener Head Tennis or Tweener_head for Twitter. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Hope to see you guys soon. Thanks, guys.